doing something over there and getting their ducks in a row. How's that sound?
What do you think you should be focusing on instead?
Our economy, gas prices, it's every time he gets into office, he says he's going to help farmers. And now fertilizer prices are going way up because of events around the world.
Sam, he's not focused on the things that people want him to focus on. And I wonder if part of it is because he just doesn't have the ability to sell it any longer. Paul Waldman writing, I believe this is in The Atlantic as well. Oh, no, it's a Substack. I'm sorry, Public Notice Substack. He compared President Trump to President Biden, who lost the ability to be an effective spokesperson for his own agenda, didn't have the bully pulpit any longer. And he says Donald Trump has reached that same point. He can still command attention, but he can no longer convince anyone who isn't part of his cult of anything, not that the Iran war is a great victory, not that the economy is better than ever, not that we're respected around the world, and not that when Republicans lose this election, it was stolen from them. And the fact that he has lost whatever power of persuasion he once had will go a long way to keep the election safe from his attempts to undermine it. So that's an optimistic view of what might happen in November. But I think the thing that I find so compelling here is that Donald Trump does not have that power of persuasion any longer. Do you agree?
Well, I think a couple things are happening here. One is lack of power of persuasion. Two is essentially what is happening with Bill Pulte, which is there's a difference between being outside the government and then being inside the government. So Trump's able to talk about deep state conspiracies. He's able to talk about, the need to get rid of, open up the Epstein files and lowering energy costs by 50% and bringing an end to the war in Ukraine within 24 hours when he's not president. But then when you are president, you sort of have to answer for those issues. And I think that's a problem. But, why is he obsessed with this stuff when the voters don't really seem to care that much? It's because this is the stuff that tickles him. It's the stuff that gets him going. He's long been a conspiracy theorist around the election. He can't give it up, and that's something he's never going to give up, frankly, because it's what animates him. It's not. I will just say this. It was notable that Fox News didn't cover this the next day. Part of that's litigation, obviously, because they don't want to deal with another defamation suit. But I think that they also recognize that this isn't the stuff that animates the base as much as it used to.
So, do you agree with the end conclusion there in that Substack piece that November is safe ultimately because Donald Trump can't rile up enough people any longer, Sam?
No, not at all. I don't agree with that. I think there's plenty of things Trump could do, even if it's not animating people or if he doesn't have the powers of persuasion. I think there's plenty of things he can do, and I think it's silly to think that he's just going to say, people aren't motivated by this anymore. I'm going to give it up. I think the entire purpose of that speech that he gave last week was to lay the predicate for doing stuff in the election. Now, will it pass muster? I don't know. But, you can make the case that he wants to nationalize the elections or that even after the elections are done, he'll say, well, this was contaminated by foreign interference or non-citizen voting, and therefore we can't trust or seat these people who rightfully won the election. We have plenty of history of Trump meddling in elections. Look back to January 6th. Right? I don't think that this is no longer an issue to be concerned about.
Tom, do you think there are levers of power that he's going to be able to use?
Yes, I do. And look, I think that this analysis saying that, Trump has lost his powers of persuasion and this whole focus on the election, this is all signs of desperation. I don't buy any of that. I think he has a profound core belief that the 2020 election was stolen, and he wants to just keep riding that horse. That's what we've seen. I also disagree with the idea that maybe some in the White House hold that the road to midterm success for the Republicans is by relitigating the 2020 election. I tend to agree with Senators Cornyn and Cassidy that it is not something that's going to motivate voters. But I don't think that's what's motivating the president to keep raising the issue here. I don't think he sees this as something where he is going to persuade, large numbers of people to come out and vote Republican because of what he's doing. I think, if anything, what he's doing is seeding the bed, is creating the conditions under which it will make it easier for him either to take steps in advance of the election to secure the integrity of the election, or if the election doesn't turn out the way he would like it to turn out, to take post-election steps, either by asserting greater federal